Hello everyone and welcome to the 100th episode of RPG Horror Stories. Thank you so much for sticking to the series for so long. Today I have a little gift for you. We are going to be taking a field trip. We're going to be leaving the tavern just for a little bit and journeying beyond the mists of Barovia, from which we may, well, never return, but beyond there we will find glory, horror, cringe of all sorts. My gift to you for sticking to the series for so long. Strahd's domain awaits, my friends. Without further ado, let's get started. This story happened a couple years back during an online game. The party got together and all the players seemed cool. Even Wizard's player, who would turn out to be a problem player, but he was fine at first. Things began to take a turn during our first combat encounter of the game, where two party members were downed by a couple of lucky crits from a band of kobolds we were facing. We were level 2 at the time. At this point, Wizard starts loudly muttering under his breath that this encounter was too hard and that the DM was out to get us. But what does our Wizard do to help even the odds? Does he cast a spell? Any spell? No. He does the same thing he's been doing the whole encounter and just keeps casting firebolt. We pulled through in the end, but this began a trend in which the Wizard player refused to use any sort of spell or class resource to turn things into his favor, but would loudly complain when he failed. He'd insist on being party face despite his negative charisma, and then complain the DM set the DC too high when he'd fail his persuasion checks. He'd be so stingy with both money and spell slots to the point where he would nickel and dime every single transaction and constantly haggle for more money as a reward for quests. I think he only cast a spell one time that I can recall during the whole game, even sparing a single hit dice during a short rest was something he ummed and awed for over 15 minutes. It was like pulling teeth with this guy. Things finally came to a head during an encounter in which the Wizard was cut off from the rest of the party and surrounded. And what does the Wizard do? Does he use any sort of AoE spell to get rid of the wounded enemies around him? Does he Misty Step to get to safety? Does he disengage to get to the party? Nope. He does the same thing he always does and casts Firebolt, again, at the closest enemy, 5 feet from him. The whole party was begging him to do something other than cast Firebolt again, but he simply angrily told us to not tell him how to play his character. Rolling with disadvantage because the enemy was right in front of him, the attack missed. Wizard is down the next turn despite the party catching up to him, and our Wizard freaks out, calling the DM a killer DM, blaming the party for not supporting him, insisting there was nothing else he could have done, saying the fight was unfair to begin with and that everyone was getting up on him, etc, etc. Before we can respond to any of that, he disconnects and blocks all of us. I'm pretty sure he's still out there penny pinching everything he can in Dungeons & Dragons. TLDR, player refuses to use any class resource, hamstrings himself, and then complains the game is too hard. This guy is claiming that he has homebrew rules that drastically improve the role-playing and fun of his game. I mean, if they're so good. Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition here. I'll say that less than I describe here is unacceptable. Players cannot talk about anything during the game, only characters, and they cannot talk to each other if they are not in the same scene. You are not allowed to consult the books during the game, simply because it slows down the game and no rule questioning situations are allowed during the game. We have breaks for that, and questioning the storyteller makes no sense at all. Know what you will need. Any dice roll of discipline should be known by the user. You are not allowed to speak in system terms like, I am at 3 hunger, or I have 4 health, use your discipline level. You can't do that at any time. I have control over your character's feelings and emotions, being able to warn them about fear, anxiety, or sexual attraction. Players play characters whenever possible. I give 20-minute pauses to 1-hour games, so they can go to the bathroom, eat, or talk then. You are not allowed to interrupt the narrative. You can't eat during the game. You can't use your phones during the game. Everything is carefully described, like feelings or intentions. The goal is to reach as close as possible to a situation where the players feel alone, in danger, or in simple fear of the unknown. The lights must be different for while we are playing. and the sound is only controlled by me and stopped during the pauses. Experience points are awarded at the end of the session, which lasts an average of 10 games. Points are given for avoiding metagaming. You should choose something that harms the player but makes sense to the character. And XP points can only be spent on things that have been trained, where training implies a roll of accumulated successes. You have the right to a single roll per night. I know it might sound crazy, but my players love it. I'm pretty experienced, and I've had games that lasted like 4 years. I mean, he could be telling the truth, and if he is, that's great. I'm glad that he has fun with his dictatorial control over his players' actions and food. But if he's lying, well, I wouldn't be entirely surprised. Not sure how worthy the story is of being on here, but oh boy, have I wanted to tell it for so long now. So pre-pandemic, a close friend of mine at the time created a campaign and invited me to join. It was my first time playing D&D, outside of a campaign that never met again outside of Session 0, and I was really looking forward to this. My character was pretty basic, a changeling rogue that double-wielded daggers and scammed people a lot. Fairly simple, beginner character. Session 1 rolls around and the party starts off in a usual tavern. We were then hired by an NPC to solve puzzles and fight a monster in a dungeon under a magic school. It was mostly just to test our playing abilities and how well we work together as a party. End of the session rolls around, and big twist time. The NPC that had hired us was a wight in disguise. We fought it, eventually winning. In the process though, I failed a constitution saving throw, and the wight drained my max hit points. Here's the thing. When the wight drains your max hit points, you're supposed to get it back after a long rest. I didn't. I spent the rest of the campaign with 6 max hit points. I was new and not well versed in the various 5th edition monsters, so the DM told me there was nothing I could do to undo this hit point reduction. No one corrected her. I barely gained any hit points when leveling up, so I was essentially useless in all future battles in that campaign, seeing as I needed to roll saving throws if an enemy even sneezed on me wrong. This was the first of a long series of issues in the campaign, including but not limited to the following. The druid, played by the DM's now ex-partner, gained a homebrewed version of the Robe of Many Things that was extremely overpowered. It was allowed to pull out literally anything from the cloak without limits. It had no weight limit, no space limit, it was just an infinite inventory. The DM 100% seriously threatened to kill all of our characters on the spot after the party briefly split up to try and accomplish multiple tasks at once. DM repeatedly called me a coward for running away from fights when I was the only one with 2 hit points and our healer couldn't help. DM gave my character a transgender twin brother that other NPCs made transphobic remarks to. Multiple players were also openly transgender/genderqueer. After quarantine, the campaign petered out. A few months later, I learned that the DM had made a new campaign and invited everyone from the previous game. A few players asked if I was coming, and the DM told them that I'd said I didn't want to join. I said no such thing, and was completely unaware of the second campaign. The DM and I had several issues outside the game, and probably shouldn't have been friends, but that's not the story for this post. But in any case, we're not friends anymore. TLDR, first time playing, DM makes my character useless in fights and lies about the mechanics as to keep it that way. So this happened a couple years ago. I was exploring D&D pretty heavily at the time and was looking for a new table or server. You find a lot of small kingdoms doing that, people absolutely drunk on the smallest amount of power, like having a Westmarch server. And then there was this one. It was absurdly organized, like methodically so, but I am an organized person, so I thought I'd fit right in. I always try to make creative and different backstories and player characters to avoid the same old tropes, and the PC I had in mind was a very old tiefling from the middle of nowhere small village that had some innate healing powers and acted as the village healer for those years. After her husband of many decades died, she was too bored and decided to adventure like those youngsters do. The server king absolutely demolished the concept. There were memes about level 1 PCs that killed armies or slayed dragons in their backstory, and I was basically laughed at until I gave up. I didn't stay for long after that. I don't know if the concept of old player characters simply boggled their mind, but thanks, I guess, for trying something different. Have fun with your dozens of young variant human fighters. Old lady equals overpowered Mary Sue knight that kills dragons. Even the most depraved of minds would find that comparison completely idiotic. This isn't on a singular game or campaign, but a community. I'm an artist and a relative newbie to D&D, been playing for like a year and a half, and during the quarantine I'm having to rely on my art skills to get some extra money since my work's been complicated and in many cases halt. I'm a private English tutor, I'm Greek and live in Greece. I also haven't been playing with Greeks due to a lack of contact with people in the hobby, so I thought I'd kill two birds with one stone and made the mistake of returning to Facebook. I thought that as a bonus, I could keep better in touch with my half-siblings through the platform, as work demands and distance have been an issue. I found the Greek D&D community and I joined, hoping to find some Greeks to play online with and maybe a good place to advertise my commissions, banking on the camaraderie of my fellow Greeks, you know? If anyone's gonna help you in hard times, it's your own folks, right? Oh, how wrong I was. I posted LFG notifications and got to talking with some potentials just to find that they were entitled as all hell. They aggressively criticized every race/class, combo choice, and suboptimal build, ridiculing my desire to write an interesting backstory, disparaging my sometimes playing male characters while I'm a girl, ribbing me constantly for engaging in a male hobby and other joys. And it got worse with my art. I posted a few personal pieces to see if the response would be good, and sure, they fell over themselves to like them and say how good they were, but then I posted my commission pages with some examples and the prices, and it all took a very sudden 180 turn. I wouldn't even take that as a character portrait for free. €60 for that? BS. I've seen better work with more realism for better prices. Good try, but I certainly wouldn't give that much money for that crappy business. They proceed to post their own art, which is actually quite good and could be worth €50+, but I don't know about better art. I wouldn't really charge €20 for this. But if the commissioner's demanding, wants changes made, and guides you every step of the way, then yeah, bleed him dry. He's describing the standard commission process, and yet acts like this is such a damn imposition. Like, what am I, a mosquito? I'll give you €10 for the lizard. The lizard being a €20 custom token of a dragonborn I put up as an example piece. Oh well, I could just get these off of Pinterest for free. That piece took you 20 hours? You must not be very practiced then. And this went on for a couple of days. I gave up, took everything down that I'd posted. I'm still terrified they stole the art anyway because not all of it was watermarked, and quit that group. But it left me bitter and resentful of both Greeks and D&D players, even though I know from experience that's not what everyone is like. But it's scary. This is supposedly the biggest D&D Greek community. This is how they act? I'm glad I ditched it when I did, but now I'm stuck grappling with imposter syndrome and worrying that my art, which I kinda depend on, isn't good enough. I'm also questioning D&D as a whole. I recently had a really painful experience brought on by my own anxiety, and now this? Quick edit after the post. I just want to extend a big thank you to the greater Reddit D&D and art community for the support and encouragement I've received since posting this. You're amazing. I love shapeshifters. I want to make a homebrew world centered around a war with shapeshifters. One idea that I had to deal with perverted players disrupting the campaign was breast mimics? What? I mean, I get where it's going. I mean, mimics are typically chests, but I think I'll pass on this one. It was my first game ever. I had watched some various RPG live streams. I was very interested in joining a campaign. So some friends and I sought out a DM since none of us knew how to run a game. At work, when talking about my desire to play, a coworker of mine said that he was an experienced DM and even had his own world setting that he had run in the past. He was notorious for stretching the truth, so I took his claims and level of experience with a grain of salt. However, I was eager to get a game going, so I figured I'd give him a shot. We arranged a session. My roommates and I hosted the game at our apartment. I played a paladin, one roommate a sorcerer, and the other roommate a bard. Another coworker of mine played a fighter. The game begins, and we are inexplicably dumped in the middle of an open field. None of our characters know each other, and there are nearby NPCs being attacked by creatures that look like giant goblins, a homebrew race of the DM's design. We complete the encounter and I RP some BS reason why all of our characters should stick together, since we weren't really given any reason. Everyone agrees. I'm eager to get to the nearest town. We make it to the nearest town, some war-torn, barricaded crater with some buildings in it, and find the Adventurers Guild. We are introduced to a female commander NPC named Farah, who seems pretty rad. She seems cold and battle-hardened and a total badass. The PCs hit it off with her, and she gives us a quest. I'm going to skip over the quests because they were all very dull. It became very evident very quickly that the DM had very little prepared. Essentially, all the quests we were given were go here, kill this missions, and they all took place in open, flat fields against the same giant goblin creatures. Just more of them each time. It was very frustrating, but that's not the worst part of the story, so moving on. We continue to operate out of the crater town and take quests from Farah, who out of nowhere expresses interest in sleeping with every player character. The bard, of course, is the only one to accept. We all think the NPC is great regardless, so as the bard and Farah are in the bard's room, we get to talking with other NPCs in town, and all of them seem to want to talk about how Farah is a... I can't say any of these words. Oh, a tramp. There you go. We think she's cool, and we defend her by saying, what, she decides what she can do with her own body, it's her business? The DM seems frustrated and tries to lure us away from Farah with male quest givers, but Farah's kind of our homie, so we stick with her. At this point, DM really ramps up her overt sexuality, which is fine, but it was clear to all of us that the DM wanted us to dislike her. We kept on taking quests from her. About 4 sessions into the game, we come back from a quest with the spoils of our easy victory, and Farah is just straight up naked in the Adventurers Guild Hall and trying to seduce us. We just act as if it's all normal and hand her a cut of our reward. The DM totally breaks character, his voice cracked as he asks, why do you guys even like her? After all of this, we can tell he doesn't want to play anymore, and we call it a day and never arrange another session. Later, I learned from other co-workers that weren't involved in the game that the DM is kinda sexist, who often talks about how all women are tramps and badmouths the female employees behind their backs. Not too long after our game ended, he was fired for this behavior. I am now in a different long-running campaign with a lot of the same people. The encounters are more varied, and the DM is not sexist. All is well. This happened a few years ago, but I finally want to contribute something to this sub. When I started grad school, I joined a D&D group that my now very good friend was DMing. He was a rookie DM and almost all the players were newbies too, myself included. Honestly, it was super fun and everyone was very chill and encouraging. Except for one player who we will call Curtis. Everyone in the group was a good/neutral character, except for Curtis, who was playing a chaotic evil fighter that would sometimes try to actively sabotage our goals or antagonize us. Major red flag. When his plans failed, he felt like everyone and the DM were plotting against his character. He was usually whiny and short-tempered, but the first actual temper tantrum he had was about his superiority dice. He had used all of his charges, and when the DM reminded him of this, he went full-on 5-year-old and threw his dice across the table while pouting. Red flag number 2, you think? The ultimate meltdown happened one session while the party was escorting an NPC to a magic item that would help the group. The NPC was an interesting guy who had gotten along with all of us, especially my glamour bard. Out of the blue, Curtis decided to start bullying the NPC and trying to steal his belongings right in front of everyone. The monk in our party steps up and confronts Curtis, which ultimately ends up with the dreaded player v player combat since Curtis refused to back off. Wanting to also help out the NPC, my bard starts giving inspiration to the monk, and this is where Curtis loses it. Red in the face, he screams out of character, I'm just going to do what my character would do and everyone is attacking me! You all clearly hate me, so I guess I'll just leave and I'll be done playing with you. After that uncomfortable outburst, we calmly explained that it wasn't personal and that our characters were standing up for their friend because we were doing what our characters would do. We said we wanted to still play with him, but we want to play with him, where we could all be working together. He tweaked his character a little bit after that to be more of a team player, but everyone still walked on eggshells when he was around the table. He graduated a few months later and moved away, and we went on to have so many great sessions and one-shots with the best people I've ever played with. I don't know what Curtis is up to now, but hopefully he's doing okay and learn from that session, if he's still playing. This story happened several months ago in an online game of 5th edition. The DM was a nice enough guy at first who'd played 2nd edition when he was a kid, and now that he was retired, he decided to get back into D&D with 5th edition. Our first session went well, we killed a few goblins, freed some townspeople, and had a good time together. Following this session, the DM placed up a chart with lawful, chaotic, and good evil axis with our characters' names placed upon it. I found that my character, a chaotic neutral bugbear fighter, had been placed in a true neutral bracket. When I asked him why, he said that it was because of how my character had acted in that session, by deciding to go along with the quest? I told him I disagreed, that I wasn't going to be a jerk and not go along with the content he prepared, and that I really didn't think character alignment should be determined or changed by one single action, especially one as insignificant as taking up a quest with a reward that was promised. He said, and I quote, "That's just how alignment works. Every action determines alignment, no matter how small." Now, this does make some sense, but this DM had a very arbitrary idea of what constituted the exact behaviors of each alignment, and would not broke any debate. I wouldn't even say how he viewed the morality and therefore how one's alignment would shift of an action until the next session. By session 6, every single one of us had changed alignment at least twice, with our wizard in particular being deemed chaotic evil for stealing a pair of keys to rescue an innocent prisoner because stealing is always wrong even when done for the right reasons? Session 7 was our last session as barely anything happened because we players were sick of having our characters changed by the DM repeatedly and not having them feel like our characters anymore. So we just meandered along, not doing anything. Afterwards, we told the DM that we didn't want to play anymore as we were sick of him undermining our characters, to which he told us that we clearly weren't real roleplayers and don't understand alignment, and close the server. So this is from a campaign from almost a year ago. The retail gods had seen fit to grace me and my fiancé, as well as 2 other couples, the same day off, so we could play D&D together. Out of the 6 of us, myself and the DM were the only real experienced players. I knew that role-playing is sometimes a challenge for newbies, so the DM and I came up with a plan for my character to try to help get everyone out of their comfort zones a bit. And by this I mean just pushing them to roleplay, nothing horrific. So I made my character an elvish cleric who'd spent her life in the temple, being treated like royalty since she was considered to be a chosen one from some prophecy. When she came of age, it was revealed she was in fact not the chosen one, and was immediately kicked out of the temple. My plan was to play her as an incredibly sheltered girl who'd been waited on and served her entire life, so she was very naive and spoiled. Of course, as the adventure went on, she would grow and change into a better person. I discussed this briefly with the party, wanting to make sure they were okay with a party member that wasn't going to be 100% cooperative at the beginning. They said it was cool, and the campaign started. Things went well at first. My character stumbled into a bar and overheard a conversation about a resistance to a church that was seemingly up to no good. Ended up joining the resistance, and the other party members did as well. We were given a map to the resistance hideout in a nearby forest. Everybody loved my character's incredulous reaction to having to walk to the hideout as opposed to taking carriages like normal. Along the way, we roleplayed. My character was terrified of the tiefling because, you know, big demon-y looking thing, and annoyed by the halfling, who was playing the party jokester, and we were having a great time. Eventually, we got ambushed by a group of goblins. During the fights, my cleric didn't do much beyond cast Bless a couple times and heal a scratch the barbarian got. Much eye-rolling and shouts of "what" ensued as my character did her best to avoid melee combat. Later that night, after the session ended, the DM texted me with a list of complaints from some of the group about my character and her actions during combat. We met up a week later, and we had a discussion about my character. I apologized to the group and explained in greater detail my plan for the cleric. I reminded everyone we were level 1, and that at that level, I was useless as a melee fighter, considering, 9 hit points, and that I didn't shy away from healing and buffing the party. They didn't seem over the moon by me sticking to my character, but they agreed. Sticking to characters, sticking to good sense. I mean, first, Bless is a good spell, and what's the cleric supposed to do? Whack them with a mallet and then get immediately murdered? Fast forward to the next combat, we have a run-in with some low-health bandits, who then begin combat by hurling insult at us. My cleric passed the check to not be intimidated, and combat began proper. Following the advice of some friends, I decided the cleric would at least try to do some damage this combat, role-playing it as her being enraged from the insults from the bandits. So I cast Guiding Bolt, go to make my attack roll, and I roll a nat 1. DM does a great job describing it as the flame fizzling out just an inch away from her palm and is met with laughter from the bandits. I roleplayed that with the cleric losing her confidence and basically resorted to the same tactics as the first combat. Again, I'm met with shouts and general outrage from some of the group. I tried to remind them of the conversation we'd had like literally a couple hours before, but I got shouted down. After a few more rounds of combat, when my turn came up, I took the dodge action. The party's health was nearly full. I had Bless going, and I was trying to stay in character. The ranger's turn was next. He looked at me and said, "Screw this, I shoot the cleric," and rolled a dice? Now, we have agreed beforehand that as soon as the dice is tossed, that's it, no taking actions back, no do-overs. I sat in silence while the ranger rolled a 17, then 19, definitely hits. Rolls his d8, 7 plus 3, I'm down. At this, I just start packing my stuff up. I felt sick to my stomach. I could feel a lot of good old social anxiety creeping in. The DM tried to intervene, saying he'd let me stabilize without making any death saves. I calmly told him I'd pass and left. Leave my character sheet on the table. The DM texted me later that night apologizing, but I told him it wasn't his fault, the group was acting like that, but I did mention he might want to stop his players from murdering each other in future campaigns. Honestly though, this kind of killed D&D for me, at least for now. I was really excited about my character and had a really good plan in mind for their development. To have a group decide for me that wasn't okay, and that I had to play like it was Final Fantasy, where everyone participates in combat regardless of their personality, has me feeling like this isn't worth the effort. TLDR, made a character that has some personality flaws and wasn't willing to be a frontline fighter as a cleric. Party didn't like this, ended up murdering my character mid-combat. How dare you, cleric? How dare you take a perfectly sensible action in combat? How dare you play your character that we approved before this campaign? And how dare you buff us with a good first level buff spell that gives us an extra d4 damage dice? How dare you? Hi, I'll try to keep this brief. I usually spend my Fridays at a local hobby store playing Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering. Over the years I've been playing there, I got a crush on one of the employees. She has a boyfriend named Robert, but I felt like I had to say something or I'd regret it, so I did. She told me she was flattered but not interested. I'm not the type to give up, and my dad always told me persistence pays off, so I started bringing her flowers every day, both at work and at her apartment. I didn't stalk her, she lives close to the store, and I've seen her walk home a few times. She took me aside on Monday and told me she felt like it would be best if I dropped out of the D&D group she runs at the store. I asked her if she was kicking Robert out of the group. She said no, claiming that I was harassing her. Tuesday, I went in and complained to the store owner, telling him about the situation and how it's unfair that she's kicking me out for having feelings for her but not her boyfriend. I told him how unprofessional it is to hang out with her boyfriend at work. The owner told me he'd investigate and ask for my phone number so he could get back to me. This morning, I got a phone call from him that after speaking with the DM and the other employees, I'm harassing her. And he's decided to ban me from the store. I tried to tell him they were lying, but he hung up on me. I want to sue him for punishing me for something I didn't do. Is there a specific type of attorney that specializes in this? Does the fact that I'm black and the rest of them are white give me any grounds for a discrimination lawsuit? This was posted to legal advice, and let's just say that the advice that this guy got was not the advice that he probably was hoping for. He probably needs professional help of a very different kind. My friends and I are playing Mass Effect 5th Edition, a sci-fi conversion for regular D&D 5th Edition. One of our first games had two GMs who worked together, myself and Alex, the same GM I posted about here in a different story. Of note, it was a high lethality XCOM-inspired game with missions run out of a base. There was an understanding we'd all lose characters at some point, and we used individual leveling systems based on how many enemy kills we had rather than milestone or regular experience. Yes, in hindsight, it was a god-awful system. Session 2 rolls around. As agreed on in advance, I GM'd the first half. Alex, the other GM'd the second half. We were approaching the end of the session after an intense firefight retaking a volcano base. Alex's DMPC, a battle-hardened tough guy, expressed disdain for the cowardly behavior of the shy combat medic player character who had spent some time of the fight using a first aid spell and firing potshots over cover. Another PC stood up for the shy medic. The GMPC, being a hulking titan of a creature, succeeded on a strength contest to throw both of them inside a metal shipping container, toss a grenade in, and shut the door. This was a grenade that was supposed to deal 3d8 thunder damage. Alex decided, for drama and rule of cool, it dealt 12d10. With only one failed check, the two full health player characters his GMPC shoved inside the shipping container were obliterated. Afterwards, Alex happily described it as intense player conflict and pulled off his favorite nervous laugh. The laugh that said, I'm not responsible, but I have bad news for all of us. Oh, 2 player kills? He mused cheerily. They were both level 3, right? So equivalent to challenge rating 3, that means I level up 6 times. The murdered players were more than a bit unhappy, and I did bring this up to him as the other DM, suggesting leveling off PvP would be problematic, but I was dismissed. Dismissed so hard, he kicked me out of my co-DMing position a few sessions later. Alex's DMPC was now level 9. The rest of us were level 3. The power discrepancy remained, eventually seeing him being level 20 by session 10, while we still had level 9 players in the party. This also gave rise to Alex homebrewing cybernetics to allow his DMPC to dual-wield two-handed weapons like sniper rifles. The phrase, he's gonna make 23 attacks, is still infamous among us to this day. I hope the horror speaks for itself. Several years ago, my wife, at the time girlfriend, asked me to join her college board gaming group because they wanted to try out Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 for Pathfinder. I'd be joining as a player. Another member wanted to be the DM. This would be his first time doing anything with Dungeons & Dragons or tabletop role-playing games. In fact, my wife was the only one there who had played Dungeons & Dragons or any TTRPGs. I asked the group if they wanted me to run a one-shot so that they could get a feel for the game, so I assumed correctly no one there had read the rules or even had a book. Everyone but the guy who wanted to DM was down for a getting our feet wet one-shot. This DM was so vehemently against the idea of me running a one-shot that he decided to remind the group that I was only there to provide knowledge, books, and be an extra body for his campaign. Nothing more. So session 0 continues, and this DM has us roll up our stats. 3d6, 6 times. No redos. Oh boy. I'm realizing we have a DM that probably hasn't really read the rules, or just doesn't like fun, because a first-time casual group should not be starting out with hardcore stat generation. Nothing I say causes this DM to budge. Then I talk to the group about party balance and roles within a party. We have 2 people that want to be healers, 2 people who want to be rogues, and myself, who will just fill in any gaps. We start looking at classes, and the DM closes the book while I'm explaining how clerics work to one of the would-be healers. He takes out a single sheet of paper with a list of complete homebrew classes, just the class names, that's it. He won't let us see the list either. When he starts explaining what the classes are, their roles, and abilities, I immediately recognize them from the video game Fire Emblem. I blurt this out, and a smile cracks the DM's face. Suddenly, he now likes me because I know his absolute favorite video game. Yay me. He further explains, we will all be humans, with none of the bonuses humans get. There will be no feats, halves the stat list, and presents his own equipment list. My heart sinks even further, and my wife jokingly asked why we even needed my books. So now the DM hates me again and says we'll be using the combat rules. We meet weekly at the school and only play for 3 hours each session. I am not having a good time, but everyone else appears to be having a good time, so I keep my mouth shut and just make sure combat rules are kept. Leveling means absolutely nothing because the only way to improve is through roleplay, which wouldn't be too bad, except at the end of each roleplay scenario, we had to roll to see if we were successful in improving what we were working on, and we had no clue what the difficulty rating was. I swear, we had to roll nat 20s to be successful because those seemed like the only rolls that succeeded. The story was straight up a Fire Emblem story from one of the games. I had to keep reminding myself that this was fine because modules are a thing, and I've enjoyed them many times before. Combat was even worse. But wait, you may be saying confused, didn't you say this DM was keeping those rules and wanted you to make sure they were being followed? Didn't you say he loves Fire Emblem, a game that has a battle system almost identical to Dungeons & Dragons, except for the fact that everyone gets a counterattack after they get attacked? Those things are very true. You see, the problem was that he was using a strategy guide for enemies, numbers, and equipment. Like I said, he was straight up running a Fire Emblem game as his D&D campaign, but he did not adjust the numbers, period. Maps and encounters where the players controlled 7+ units and there were 15+ enemies still had 15+ enemies. All the enemies were NPCs with levels identical to ours. You read that right. Our group of 5 level 6 adventurers would have to fight groups of 15+ level 6 enemies. Luckily, the DM was so into Fire Emblem, we could pull off a murder ball strategy without other enemies moving until we entered their engagement zone. An area where they would magically decide you were a threat, despite the fact we've been murdering their friends like 60 feet away. Unluckily, the DM was so into Fire Emblem, he changed the way casters worked to match. Weapons and spellbooks have a durability system and break after so many uses. Healers can only heal with a rod, and casters could only use spells from up to 10 feet away for most spells. This would be great for casters, except the distance thing, as each spell would basically function like a wand with 10 to 45 uses. Except, all of our money was going into replacing spells and weapons. Enemy equipment magically dusted after being defeated unless stated otherwise, because that's how it works in Fire Emblem. After a few months of this, it all came to an end when everyone graduated and moved on with their lives. The DM didn't. He kept trying to get us to meet up at his new place in the city that was 1.5 hours away for most of us, 3 hours away for one person. He threw a full-blown meltdown on Messenger and made snide comments about how his days off are being ruined. For some reason, he could not grasp that people didn't want to drive 3 to 6 hours one day every week on top of the time they've already driven, because his days off were Monday and Tuesday. We could only play at his place for some reason, by the way, even though 4 out of 5 of the players had places we could play at. I guess he didn't want 3 hours of driving on his day off. Imagine that! The group made a new messenger group without him and asked me to DM, and I quote, a real D&D campaign. Turns out they all hated it, but said nothing because I said nothing, and I said nothing because I was the new guy to the group and thought they were having fun and I didn't want to stir the pot. They realized what they were playing was nothing like D&D after my wife took them aside and made them watch a Critical Role episode. Fortunately for me, she said most DMs are not Matt Mercer and not to expect that from me. So far, they said they are having fun and think I'm improving as a DM. This is a weird one because I wasn't even playing with the DM in question. We were working in the same office. I was a contracted writer. He was a full-time employee, and it came up in conversation that we both played tabletop RPGs. Almost immediately, things got weird. For one thing, as soon as this guy heard I was a writer, he starts negging me about it. Almost every conversation we had was just him ranting loudly about how my work sucked and he could do much better. I use a 3-act structure. No, good writers, they use a 4-act structure. This IP has a female character in authority. That's just unrealistic. Nobody takes a woman seriously. I'm sure you all just get the picture. He'd also complain about everything else I did. My choice of lunch, my accent, the way I took the stairs instead of the elevators. It was exhausting. I figured that he just didn't like me and went out of my way to avoid him, but he kept following me around, even started waiting at my desk at lunchtime. So, I'm already getting bad vibes from this guy, and then one day he sits next to me at lunch and presents me with the golden opportunity to practice my writing by, get this, writing his entire campaign for him. He assures me that he'll come up with all the ideas, and that when it gets published, I don't know what he meant by that, my name will be on the cover. He even offers to pay a £100 flat fee. So obviously I say no. Even if this guy hadn't spent months harassing me and disparaging my work, my day rate is way higher than that, and I don't even work on RPGs. He doesn't take no for an answer. In fact, he starts shouting at me right there in the cafeteria in front of all of our co-workers, and then punches a wall when I continue to say I won't work for him. To cut a short story even shorter, he didn't pass his probation period, and I haven't seen him since. Apparently I wasn't the only person who found him difficult to work with, and his cafeteria tantrum was the latest in a series of incidents. So this campaign has been going on for a while and is getting close to its end. Here are the relevant players. Fighter, an older guy, doesn't like people's crap. For some reason invited our antagonist to this story. Jim, the problem player, whose alias comes from the fact that I find it funny. Played a paladin, embodied the stereotype of lawful stupid. There are more, but they did very little to contribute to the horror of the story, so we shall begin. This campaign had been going on for a fairly decent while, and all the players were around level 18. Before going to our final dungeon and winning the campaign, they wanted to mop up some things around the world they've been stalling on. On Jim's personal hit list was a dragon. This specific dragon was a white dragon I described as beyond ancient. This thing was a massive behemoth of a dragon who'd helped the party since the BBG had wiped out some of his followers. Why did Jim want this thing dead, you may ask? Well, it's because chromatic dragons are inherently evil. This thing is better off dead. Sure, but we should probably focus on some other stuff. This thing hasn't been described as doing anything evil. What's the harm? Oh, come on, you're just scared. The thing's like CR20, we could probably take it. Easy there, Jim. Things are kind of getting close to metagaming. Okay, whatever, come on, let's do it. Eventually, though, through being a whiner and stubborn as a mule, Jim managed to convince the rest of the party that this dragon has to go. While he was right about the ancient white dragon being CR20, this was not ancient. I'd often described it as beyond ancient and towering over even other dragons they'd seen. This thing was a white great worm. I think subconsciously the fighter knew this, but didn't tell the party about it because of reasons? I don't know, the fighter was kind of a piece of work in his own right. The fight begins, and the party somehow miraculously win initiative against this thing and take a few swings. They try to take some swings at him, but deal with minuscule amounts of damage. I decide to be a bit merciful and give them a chance. This thing doesn't see them as much of a threat, so the dragon mostly just does a basic job at defending himself. Even with that, his claws and bites tore into the party's hit points, and used his insane mobility to climb or fly out of flanking positions. Eventually, the dragon reached half hit points and started trying. He flew into the air, sent his cold breath down the party. I rolled almost max on the damage, and it was more than enough to turn the wizard into a statue, dead on the spot. They also dealt a sizable chunk to even those who succeeded. What the hell? This thing's way too strong. Didn't you say it was ancient? I literally said it was beyond ancient. An expression of realization crossed across Jim's face, almost realizing his mistake. Much too late, sadly. The rest of the party was ended by the dragon, destroyed by it actually putting up a massive fight. After this little fiasco, I did some thinking, and extended the party an olive branch. So, that was certainly an encounter. Yeah, I'll wreck on it, since we're close to the end anyway. This was an optional encounter only Jim wanted, so how about it? Fighter chimes in. Sure, sounds good to me. Jim kind of threw us under the bus here, yeah? Oh, what the hell? Don't throw me under the bus here. Excuse me for fighting the evil dragon. The GM never indicated it would be that strong. I like to think I did a decent job at least saying it was stronger than you expected. Just because I never said it was the king of evil doesn't mean I didn't say it was strong. BS. Great worms aren't even in the monster manual. How was I even supposed to know? Maybe try not fighting the damn thing. That would have been smart. It eventually devolved into a screaming match between the fighter and Jim, the two of them throwing swears and childish insults back and forth. I eventually removed them both from the Discord server so I could have some quiet and apologize to the rest of the party. This happened a few years ago. A DM, I'll call him Clark, started a game at my place. He seemed like a fun-loving guy who enjoyed memes, jokes, watching anime with us, and so on. He proposed the idea of running a module for us, so we agreed. We spent our first session making characters and discussing gameplay, house rules, yada yada yada. So far, so good, nothing out of the ordinary. Finally, our first game session rolled around. We pick up our first quest and off we go into the woods to save the day. We encounter a group of goblins and battle ensues. We, the players, are quite experienced and thus we make quick work of them and win the battle. Basic milk run type stuff. DM purses his lips, slaps his DM screen and book shut, takes back all of the minis, rolls up his battle mat and packs his dice. We are completely baffled by the sudden turn of events and ask what's wrong and if he's okay. He actually shouts at us, "I didn't come here to lose. If I don't win, I'm going home." And promptly slams the door behind him as he leaves. This happened so many years ago. He was a pretty lonely guy. I remember playing cards and board games with him later on after things settled down, but whenever he lost, he just flips out and ran home. Suffice to say, we never spoke to him again. What is this? Zatan. Level 15. Minor God. No class. Alignment is just chaos. Just chaos alignment. AC of 25. Strength of 38. Dexterity of 49. I love how the rapier does 5d12 piercing damage, and the trident does 2d20 piercing damage. That's amazing. Proficiencies is just with anything, and every language too. Just to boot. That's nice. I can't imagine I would ever use this character sheet. It seems like a bit much. Just a bit. Wait, is that 1,200 hit points? Okay, scratch everything I said. We will not tolerate imbalance of hit points. This is where we draw the line. So this story didn't happen to me, but I was there to see it, and the victim gave me permission to post since they don't use Reddit. The cast is myself, playing an elf ranger at the time, host playing an illusionist halfling, and the only female player and PC in the party, and the GM as the new GM. New as in his first time GMing us, not his first time GMing allegedly. And the other two characters in the story are simply the paladin and the fighter, a la their characters. So this was back when 3.5 was in its heyday. Our group had just finished a campaign that lasted all through middle school. It ended when we started high school because our old DM, who's playing the paladin, ended up going to a separate high school for myself and host. And paladin had so much on his plate he wanted to take time off from managing a game to focus on school. However, the urge to play D&D was still within us, and soon paladin said he found a new friend who would be happy to DM, and had been doing so for a few years now. We were all stoked, and since we were told we'd be starting at first level in the same town, important to note at this point that up to session 1, our communications were handled by Paladin as the intermediary between us and new DM. We decided to all make characters who grew up there and knew one another. My ranger was a member of the town guard, fighter was the guard for a merchant who lived in the town, paladin was a member of the local temple clergy, and host was a street performer. GM okayed all the characters, only making the comment that host's character doesn't seem to mesh with the others, which we assumed meant like her past or something, but not everyone needs to be Rambo, so we thought nothing of it. The weekend arrives, and we decide to meet up at host's house, because it's more or less equidistant for everyone, and the largest house by far. The DM arrives, and no alarm bells go off, so we all sit at the table chatting a bit before beginning our game. Since our characters are generally aware of one another and knew the starting town, we jump right into it, and it's not long before a horde of goblins besets the town during the spring festival. Nothing spectacular there, nice easy start. So it's us 4-player characters against 10 or so goblins with myself, paladin, and fighter in front and our host behind us. We all roll pretty low on initiative, so the goblins go first. They all share the same initiative. A little worrisome, but hardly a portent of doom. So with 3 melee-based characters in front, a squishy wizard, aka the host, in the back, and the numbers advantage, you would think the goblins would try to surround us, or team up so it's several of them against the more dangerous PCs with swords, right? Wrong. All 10 goblins just ran right past us just to get the wizard, the host. Even with 3 of them dying to attacks of opportunity, 7 goblins get to the host. And with her 12 AC and whopping 5 hit points, she's down in 2 attacks. Completely dead in another 2, and then the next 3 are just the goblins hacking her body into applesauce. We're all a little shocked. We've lost characters before, but this is literally the first round of combat, maybe 20 minutes into the first session, and the host is dead. We were all stunned. It made no sense at all, either tactically or story-wise. We couldn't pool the resources to res her if we sold everything. And none of us were fond of Deus Ex Machina deaths for plot reasons. Host tried to ask GM what his deal was, and he replied with,
"You're dead, so you don't talk at the table. Otherwise, you need to leave."
Now, the host was a pretty tall girl. She stood easily head and shoulders above any of us. So she stands up, towering over the DM and goes, "This is my house. Now get your shit and get out." He tried to protest, looking at us to back him up, but I didn't know the guy, and none of us were going to override the host in her own house, even if we thought he was in the right, so he left. With D&D a bust, we just ordered pizza and played video games the rest of the day, more bewildered than anything else. We don't know if the GM just hates host's character despite okaying it, didn't want a girl at his table, or just had no idea what he was doing and decided to act like a little jerk when host tried to question him on it. Maybe we were a little harsh on the DM, but the way he acted to host after essentially dropping a bridge on her made it a little hard for us to sympathize with him. Power-tripping DM thinks he owns the table until he remembers who owns the house. Remember, everybody, before you decide to act like an entitled little jerk, remember,
there's always a bigger fish.
Let's set the scene for a second. You are watching High Rollers, and you see a unique take on the Warlock class, and you think, yeah, that's great. But
This is D&D with rules and guidelines set firmly in place, not some wishy-washy feminist echo chamber where you can change your gender on a whim. A non-typical warlock is not a warlock. She should reroll as a gnome. She's acting the character of the gnome race, but none of the hero classes. God only knows what class would suit her, hence an NPC. That would be best. Some skittish gnome farm girl doesn't get involved in anything, instead of running the acting performance of everyone else by association.
Red Redacted, relax. Everyone doesn't have to be the complete stereotype of the race and class they play. Good God.
This is D&D with rules and guidelines set firmly in place, not some wishy-washy feminist echo.
Wait, is he saying the same thing again? He's saying the same thing again. Did he rehearse this? Do you rehearse text? I like to imagine that he does. Like, he practices typing it in a mirror, and he's just like,
I need to make sure that they know that I'm the most boring person ever, and I need to make sure that everyone knows that they have to play the complete stereotype of a class, and I also need everyone to know that I hate feminism. That's very important and incredibly relevant to Dungeons & Dragons.
I like to imagine. It's a great image. But, it's only great for so long. Let's move on. Long story, but I hope you find it enjoyable, TLDR at the end. So a long time ago, about 20 years now, I got invited by a friend to a D&D style homebrew game. We had played in several games together, so I said sure. The cast is DM, homebrew game, pretty much just D&D. The lady, my friend, playing a human fighter cleric type. The guy, another human ranger, or maybe a fighter, it's been a while. And myself, playing a half-elf thief. Prior to joining the game, I asked them what they needed in the party. They were running into a lot of traps, so they needed someone to disarm them. Cue me becoming a thief. I told them I'd play a thief, house burglar type, not a combat guy. I also told them, out of character, the guy would be a cowardly thief, hiding behind the big bad fighters. Give them a chance to shine, and hey, it would make for some good roleplay. I meet up at the DM's house, get introduced to the guy, and then we start to play. They hire my character in a tavern to join them exploring some ruin. Okay, not a big deal. We start going down into this dungeon and we're walking down some tunnels with bad lighting. Score 1 for the thief. I could see in the dark and they couldn't. I think I disarmed a trapper too. Kudos to the DM for bringing me into the party right off the bat. As we explore the tunnel, the ranger is leading us. The cleric is behind him and I'm bringing up the rear. We run into some goblins, smaller group, no more than 5. Combat starts, we roll initiative. I roll poorly and go last. The humans are doing okay against the goblins and the DM asks me what the thief is going to do. I look back into the darkened alleyway, point dramatically and yell, "Ambush! They're coming up behind us!" And I run into the hall away from the fight. But there aren't any goblins down there. Yeah, I know. Next round, they're still fighting. DM asks me what I'm doing. I drop both daggers and start banging them against stone walls. Then I yell, "They're here! Don't worry, I'll hold them off!" The lady, my friend, out of character, starts laughing. The DM does too. I start going on a dramatic description in character about the goblin ambush, and I'm very clearly explaining I need no help whatsoever, and everyone just needs to stay where they're at. The guy, whom I have never roleplayed with before, does not look as amused as my friend and the DM. This continues with the 2 humans handling the goblins, but getting a little beat up in the process. My thief finally comes back, wipes his brow dramatically, and says, "Don't worry, I drove them off. I saved you." The lady is almost rolling on the floor with laughter now, and the DM is laughing too. The guy just looks pissed. My thief walks over to the dead goblin and says, "Well, time to loot the bodies. Let's see what they have."
You didn't get anything. You didn't help fight them.
What are you talking about? I held off the ambush that came behind us. We would have been overrun if I hadn't done that. You should be thanking me, good sir.
No, why should we let you have anything? You weren't fighting.
Me, in my mind, this is the worst thing I did the whole time. Remembering lying from AD&D 2nd edition Player's Handbook, I just say, well, since we're going to split the treasure equally, I think you should get some because you're really banged up and I don't have a scratch on me. The guy,
I shoot the thief with my bow.
At this point, I'm a little flabbergasted. I did not see that coming. He shoots me. Now, when you're making a thief, and especially when you're making a cowardly thief, you need to be able to do things. Run and dodge. That's about it. And my thief was really good at both. The guy totally missed. Still in character, I said, "Whoa, no need of that, or it gets ugly." The guy turned to the DM.
I will give you $10 to make that a critical hit instead of a miss.
What, really? That guy takes out a wallet, takes a $10 bill, and hands it to the DM. The DM looks at me and just says, okay, I guess it's a critical hit, roll double damage. I stood up and said, no, I don't think so, I'm done. Not the least because I was pretty sure double damage from the ranger would just kill me outright. I grab my books and bag and start to walk. The lady tries to tell me to wait and let's talk about it. The DM just says it's all for fun and the guy doesn't say a word. I like the lady, but not that much. I just noped out and left. Never played with the GM or that guy again. Now, I get that maybe the guy didn't find my antics funny, or that he disagreed with what I did, but definitely, as far as the characters knew, I had been fighting ambushing goblins, and to start a PvP like that, with someone you just met, I felt that was poor sportsmanship, but straight up bribing the DM, and the DM taking it, no D&D is better than bad D&D like that. TLDR, player starts PvP combat and then pays the GM real money for a critical hit against me when he misses. So my high school group of friends played a lot of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. We were a reasonably sized group, so I'm not going to waste time listing everyone. The people in this group you need to know are me, playing a Tiefling Cleric, Jonah, our longtime perma-DM, and Eric, playing a half-orc fighter. Eric was new to the group. Jonah had met him at some sort of school event. I think it was a band concert. He had mentioned wanting to find a group to play in, so Josh offered him a place in the campaign we were just starting. We always have room for new players. Some background on myself. I am openly lesbian in real life. No one gives me crap for this. 2/3 of the group were LGBT themselves. I always roleplay as bisexual characters, however, because why let my sexuality get in the way of writing a good story for myself? My character and Eric's character eventually entered a pretty sweet and interesting romance, and it added a lot to party dynamics. Eric, however, did not understand the difference between Dungeons & Dragons and reality. He thought I was legitimately into him. He didn't realize I was gay and asked me out. I gently corrected him, and he said that he didn't realize and that he was sorry. Problem solved, right? Nope. Eric's character got progressively nastier to mine in-game, to the point where Jonah had to ask him to leave one night because he took it way too far. The final straw was when he sent me an email. I'm in art school now, and I did drawing commissions in high school to help pay for it. Eric requested a detailed, full-color illustration of his character engaging in kinky sex with mine. I forwarded the email to John, and he was immediately kicked out of the group. I saw him around school, but I don't know what happened to him after graduation. This story is about a DM who is just generally kind of a gross person in and out of roleplay. NSFW is tagged for a reason, but it's incredibly light and probably unnecessary. To set it up, this was in an online 140-ish person campaign split into divisions of 6, which were then split further down into campaigns of 6 or so with their own DMs each, and would eventually all join together. An ambitious idea, and no, not one that got off the ground. I joined the campaign of 6 before the problem DM joined. It was originally my friend who was meant to run it, and I decided to stick around after they quit for totally unrelated reasons. When DM announced he'd be taking over, his nickname in the server was Only Horny Allowed. First red flag, but he seemed nice enough, even if he had a really smug/cryptic typing style. Things sort of languished for a few weeks, with DM occasionally talking about how punishing the campaign was going to be. In hindsight, another red flag. The only players assigned to him at the time were myself and one other person who wanted a certain thing to be tailored to her character in a very specific way. She was generally polite when the DM said no, though, even if she never submitted her character sheets and kind of went inactive. Eventually more people joined, and actually, we got started. Yes, even with that one person never submitting her character sheet. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but with how totally inactive she'd been, we all kind of assumed she was no longer interested, or otherwise just unable to play. The DM seemed to focus a lot on other people's characters too. The other 4 were mostly his friends, or just people he knew better than myself. So maybe that had something to do with it. So you'll recall how his nickname is Only Horny Allowed? Yeah, the dude really liked making NSFW jokes to the point of literally posting videos of people reading, censored thank God, hentai scripts and asking if he should do it himself. Only 10 minutes in, someone who was playing in a campaign in the same general blob where my DM was a player had messaged me to warn me about that tendency of his. But it was too late for the main horror story to kick into high gear. This man had forced another one of the players into having a really important item be a sock filled with white liquid. I did not know until I reacted to the whole hentai script thing with, "Hey, I'm really uncomfortable with NSFW stuff. Can you please tone it down?" He said, "Oh, then you're gonna hate this." I found out the player whose character was affected was also extremely uncomfortable, but also really didn't want to have to deal with talking to the person running the server at large with the DM's garbage. So I really quickly typed up a message to send to the mod, ran it by the player affected, and then sent it out. Mod came down on the DM hard. Funny. Told him if he pulled anything else, he would be kicked out, and made it a general rule in the server that things shouldn't be too not safe for work. DM threw a fit, ranting about how the mod was ruining his campaign, how the roleplay would be crappy, because if he doesn't describe in graphic detail the injuries the characters face, the players won't react realistically. After that, he went totally radio silent. If people asked out of character what was happening, he would only reply with, "Maybe the campaign is gone." Nothing else, and he had not yet officially quit. I then discovered a friend who'd been in a different campaign in the big blob of campaigns and had been sent an invite to a server that the DM was flat out describing as that campaign group, but better. I sent DM a private message asking about the states of our campaign, and he confirmed that not only was he no longer going to continue, he was waiting on finishing up his replacement so he could advertise it before quitting. I called his ass out to the rest of the group, to which he finally officially quit. Upon asking why he was quitting an active session, he said, "Do I need a reason?" Classy. I'm aware these last parts have probably seemed really hostile, but this dude just sets me off. The larger campaign eventually shut down, with most of the active 6-person ones just taking their stuff elsewhere. I ended up joining the remains of one of those, with DM as a player though, unfortunately coming in after I had established my character to a point where I really don't want to leave. So I'm kind of just avoiding him and having my character interact with the others, much more pleasant players. As a side note, his character has no other traits other than being smug and being a quote-unquote trap, arguably a horror story in its own rights, but a footnote to this one. Well, everyone, it appears we've reached the end of the horror stories that we can take from the wilds of Barovia. Perhaps it's time to... Wait, why do I hear boss music? Oh dear. Okay, it's time to go, everybody. Through the portal, everyone! Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for sticking to the channel in 2021. This channel has done really well this year, and the growth and the support has been overwhelming. So I can only say thank you. You guys have been awesome. Thank you for watching this exceptionally long 100th episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. The year is wrapping up soon, but it's never too late to check out more of our videos. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, please do go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment "that guy" to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's just like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.